Hi, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rami Branitzky, and I'm going to be the moderator for this fascinating session in which we're going to talk about tech trends for the 21st century, not to be confused with any other century, just to make sure. We have a distinguished set of panelists here, and I'll give them momentarily a chance to introduce themselves and what they do. What we're going to talk about this afternoon is primarily going to be about some future-facing trends, some things that we believe could be game changers as far as industry is concerned. And the nice thing about this panel is that we have a very diverse panel as well with different vantage points in terms of current trends. We're also going to talk a little bit about you and your companies, and also given the fact that you're all senior executives in various roles, we'll talk about things such as talent and how to retain talent. And we'll talk about things that you like personally in terms of technology. And so with that, maybe I'll quickly introduce myself first. I'm Rami Branitzky, and I'm Managing Director at Sapphire Ventures. Up until a week ago, we were known as SAP Ventures, but we spun out of SAP a couple of years ago, and we wanted to make sure that we are known for our independence, in a sense. We have about $1.4 billion under management, primarily invest in late-stage stuff. Also a fund of fund. We're investor in also a couple of Israeli venture firms as well. And we're based here out of Palo Alto with some presence in Europe as well. I've been a partner there for about a year. I was an entrepreneur before, as an executive at SAP. I ran business development globally for SAP AG. And before that with an Israeli startup called Top Tier Software that was founded by a pretty well-known entrepreneur, Shai Agassi. We sold the company back in 2001 to SAP, and I stayed there for a while. And so with that, pleasure to see you all. And Andy, why don't you take it from here?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Andy Stone. I'm with Zurich Insurance. I'm responsible for all of our security architecture and strategy globally. So we operate in about 172 countries across the world and face a diverse set of unique security challenges. So I can give you a perspective from a large enterprise and a growth as well. We've grown our security practice from 30 to 40 5 years ago to about 450 this year. So tremendous growth.
Hi, good afternoon. Ittai, Bareket. I'm CEO at Netformx. We're a software vendor in the sales enablement, in the networking, telecom data center space. So basically enable sales teams of Cisco partners, Juniper, some EMC and others to get to market faster and win more deals, be able to implement the solutions and do that in a profitable way. We are based in, headquartered here in San Jose, based in Israel, so we have about 100 people in Israel in the development, and we have users in 144 countries, so quite a global company with a global exposure.
Hi, I'm Joan Wrabetz. I'm the CTO in the Emerging Technologies Group at EMC, and I work on next generation converged infrastructure solutions. And I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've been at EMC for 18 months, and prior to that I was mostly an entrepreneur, occasionally a venture person, a few other things.
Hi everybody, my name is Tal Broda and I'm the CTO at SOASTA. We are a company that provides solutions to do load testing, functional test automation, and real user monitoring for software companies and also for retail financials and banking. We have founded in 2006 and have been in this business for about 8 years. We are based in Mountain View, but we have offices around the world. And I'm originally from Israel, but I've been in the Valley for about 15 years now, working at various startups with a quick stint for 4 years working for Oracle.
I'm Dennis Cox. I run engineering at Ixia. We're based in Calabasas, California. We build everything you need to figure out what's wrong with your network and get visibility in it. Before that, I was the founder of Breaking Point, which we sold to Ixia. And before that, I was the founder of Tipping Point, which we sold to 3Com back in 2005. And before that, I found another company we sold to Cisco. And before I found that, I sold another company which we sold to Vario.
Wow, wonderful. So we'll talk about some trends and things that you're sensing as far as the next big thing. So I'm sure there'll be some interesting questions there. So we have a very interesting, diverse, as I said, very diverse set of experiences, big companies, small companies, ex-entrepreneurs, entrepreneurs. So with that, maybe I'll first kick things off by asking a question that has to do with, well, the volatility of the market a little bit, but in terms of creation and destruction of market cap. when you think about some of the traditional industries that have been disrupted in recent years, you can think about brick and mortar, sort of like, retail as an example. You can think about things that have to do with autonomous driving, which has a huge potential. Which sectors and industries do you see mostly disrupted now going forward in, say, the next 5 to 10 years from your particular vantage points? And maybe Joan, we'll start with you.
Aha. Okay. Well, I decided it would be useful to do some research on this. So I looked at the list of top 25 companies in the world in the Fortune 500, because I figured if you're going to have a big impact on either disrupting or either through creation or destruction of market cap, it's probably going to affect those industries. And I found something very interesting. So the number one company in the world is Walmart, a retailer. I think we can all guess what likely possible disruptions could happen to Walmart. The number 2 through 24, with very few exceptions, are oil companies and car companies.
Yep.
So, and I think it's also clear that there needs to be and will be some kind of major disruption there, at least in the next 20 years, particularly in the oil company space, and then both for reasons aside from that and also part of that, car companies. And then there are 2 electronics companies, not surprisingly it's Apple and Samsung. And when I think about Samsung, they're everything that's in your house. But when you think of the likely disruption among those 2, it's really about sort of wearable, carryable electronics. That's where all the money and profit creation has been and probably will continue to be for a while. And then if we go just a tad further, we get to 2 insurance companies, United Health Group and CVS Caremark. It's saddening to me that it's not a medical company in the top 30, it's insurance, but I think we're going to see major disruptions in healthcare in all aspects, certainly in the next 5 to 10 years. So the bottom line was I looked at the top 35 companies in the world, and I don't think any of them has a chance. So I think it'll be different. Everything will be different.
Cool. I mean, I'm interested to know why you haven't picked any of the regulated industries. Well, we'll talk about that in a second. Andy, given that insurance came up as one of the industries that are about to be disrupted, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I would tend to agree. I think insurance will certainly be disrupted. If you look at the likes of Google and other companies, what they're trying to do with a self-driving car, for instance, you really start to wonder, where will insurance be placed? Will the car manufacturers now insure the vehicles? Will someone else insure them? Will you still have a third-party insurance agent to insure your property? Because those insurers aren't going to necessarily protect you from vandalism or from just random things that could occur. So insurance certainly is a disruptive space. One of the things that we recently focused on in our security team was how IoT comes into play in the security markets specific to insurance. So, as Internet of Things becomes more prevalent, what's that do to insurance? So now we've got more sensor feeds, we've got more data points, we can collect data. Can we action the data? Insurance companies are great at collecting data. We have huge farms of data, actuarial and otherwise. But actioning that data becomes a real challenge over time. So if you look at trends in North America versus trends in Europe versus trends in APAC or Latin America, that you can collect a lot of data, but being able to turn that into real information and actionable information becomes a challenge.
Yeah, based on regulations and different legislative environment, pretty much. Dennis, any thoughts on that question as a whole?
No, I think you covered it. I think you got it all. Oil, everything.
Ittai?
Yeah, maybe just to add on that, I think that when you look at the data, building upon the big data, right? So you look at analytics today, you look at diagnostics, descriptive, predictive, and then prescriptive. Those are kind of the directions that analytics and big data is going. I think we've done a great job at collecting the data, but have not yet done a great job at being more operational and prescriptive, leveraging the data. And if I look at disruption going forward, I think that is going to be disruptive across the board. We're starting to see it in different areas, but it's going to be disruptive across the board because leveraging the amounts of data we have to make better decisions, if it's in healthcare, if it's in the car industry, or if it's in almost any other industry that we're looking at, right? I think that's going to be the most disruptive in the companies that will be able to pull the data together, correlate it, and then be able to make sense out of it to be more prescriptive on, okay, what do you need to do? So for example, when you go to the doctor and the doctor says, based on your symptoms, this is the medication you need, but even more so, if based on your symptoms, you should have eaten something different, right? That is where I think where the world is heading, and that will disrupt all industries.
Interesting. And thank you for bringing up big data. I was concerned that if none of us say big data, cloud, and mobile in the first 5 minutes, you guys think we're not strategic. So, yeah, well, there you go. Tal, any thoughts on the same question?
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think that the innovation in big data is not anymore about collecting the data, but actually making sense out of it. And that's one of the areas that we look at one of our products, Int'l, which allows you to collect insane amounts of data on everything that's happening to your website. But a lot of people can do that. The question is, can you actually, present that data in real time and allow people to take action on it to fix problems that they have in their website? And that's something that we specialize in. So I think that's, an area that's ripe for disruption, where in the past people just collected a bunch of log files and then looked at them historically, where now we are moving big data into real time, which is I think the next phase of it. But I would say if you look at innovation in general, what you really need to think about is what Mark Andreessen said, right? Software is eating up the world.
Yep.
Anything that hasn't been touched or disrupted by software is about to.
Yep.
And we've seen it anywhere from financials to, I guess, the taxi industry with what's happening with Uber, to the hospitality industry with what's happening with Airbnb. So I think it's just all over the place, and you can just pick up any industry that you want that hasn't been disrupted by software, and the opportunity for disruption would just present itself.
Sure. Dennis, you had a comment?
Yeah, there's only one thing I'd say about this. Everything we mentioned is bad against people. It's great for products, it's great for profit, it's great for governments, but there's no privacy in what you said.
Yeah.
They really disrupt insurance. How is that private? If they really read everything you did and know what you had a sandwich and they won't take care of you medically because you ate the wrong thing, how is that a good thing? How is any of that a good thing? So I guess I would say the biggest thing that gets conquered is our freedom. That's what happens with all the technology.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's one of these philosophical questions about whether technology is good or bad. It's probably neither. It's more about whether people take advantage of it or not, or abuse it or not. And it's an open-ended question, I guess. And if anyone wants to comment on that question, I think you bring up a great point.
So there's a new bill that's pending in California that actually charges drivers by the mile. And the privacy is the component. It's a tax, basically. I think you pay 1.5 cents per mile you drive. But this has been done in Oregon and a couple of other places, and it seems that privacy is a huge concern on a go-forward basis. And from an internal perspective, in insurance, I can tell you that privacy of our customers is certainly a deal, especially as you look globally because of all the regulation that occurs. So if you do business in Germany or Switzerland, especially, that there's certainly higher bars to achieve from a regulatory perspective and a privacy perspective. So it definitely becomes complex. It's a matter of figuring out what the U.S. will do.
Well, but we just had conversations just before this, several companies where because they, have a camera so you can wave your hand in front, they're going to tell you how many people are in your bedroom. And, and nobody's regulating that. And we have people watching everything you say with text messages so they can give you ads. Great. But now everyone's watching all, which of course Google's already doing, right? So it is true. On the one hand, we're regulating companies at a very high cost to ensure privacy, which of course we're not getting because everybody's getting hacked. On the other end of the spectrum, we have the unregulated businesses going crazy with absolutely no sense of privacy. So I think if we're going to tax the companies that are already in business with a high regulatory tax, while the startups in new markets are going crazy, we got a problem. Right?
So whose job is it to create the checks and balances?
I don't know.
Is it government? Is it consumers?
No, I don't know.
Self-imposed?
Well, there's a long history, by the way, that the industries that self-regulate end up with the fewest restrictions. And the industries that are most abusive are the ones that are most highly regulated and most damaged, right? So I guess my advice on that would be don't go the route of the cigarette industry, right? Go the route of the industries that develop their own protocols and their own standards to regulate the behavior early on before there's a push for government to get involved.
Right. And essentially, I mean, I think we heard from a bunch of marketing automation tools and ed tech companies here as well, and there's so much data that they're collecting about us as consumers. Now, as a venture capitalist, we analyze this just based on the metrics, and the more the merrier. The more information you have, the merrier. And the chances are higher for you to get funded. But it doesn't necessarily bodes well for us as consumers. So that's an interesting equilibrium that has to be yet to be established. With that, Tal, if I may ask you a question that has to do with your own sort of like personal preferences as far as technology. Say that you take the last 12 months or so. Which one technology made a big difference in your life that you care to share with us?
Yes, I think from personal life, I think, the technology that made the most difference in our lives is definitely, the ability to drive without fuel, right? So basically, the, innovations that we've seen from companies like Tesla is definitely changing the world. At least you can see them very, very much here in the Valley, where every other car is a Tesla, and I think that made a big difference for us personally. But if you look outside, like my personal life at work, I think that the most disruptive thing that we have seen is cloud and mobile, and not just use these as buzzwords. We were able to build a business around the cloud because we've taken load testing that was typically a thing that people did behind the firewall and took a very long time to allocate servers and run a test, and leverage cloud computing, 17 different cloud providers on top of one platform, where in a click of a button we can, and our customers can allocate thousands of servers, run a massive scale load test, collapse it, and get out. And that works for both web apps and mobile apps. So I think those two technologies really are why we are, in business today.
So nice plug for SOASTA. My question then is, just as a follow-up, in terms of an enabling technology that allow you to be so disruptive at the company. Is it cloud? I mean, what is it that enables you?
Yeah, it's definitely. So our customers build a lot of mobile apps, so they need to test them. But our ability to test them at a very, very high scale for a really disruptive price is definitely cloud computing. Where in the past you had to, as a customer, go and buy a lot of servers and rack them and stack them and network them, and only weeks later start the test.
Right.
Today, because of cloud computing, you can run a globally distributed, massive scale cloud test within minutes, and that's something that is definitely disruptive and definitely enabled us.
Thank you. Ittai, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd say that for us it's probably video, and leveraging both in the private and the work life. So since we have people actually globally, what I find is that the ability to have video-based conference calls adds a lot of value. And the interesting thing is people were against it initially because they said, look, when it's noon here, it's 10 p.m. in Israel, so now you're going to see the people in their pajamas, and nobody wants to get on a video conference call. And what I find is it's different with customers, but internally in the company, actually, we bought cameras for all employees in Israel because they were the folks who were against this. And actually seeing them in their pajamas makes the relationships much better at the end of the day, right? So at least the tops, okay? So I'd say from a work life, the ability to collaborate via video, and then of course home as well, traveling the globe, being able to connect with the kids and the family and everybody else, even though it's been around for a while, I'd say that is probably had the most impact.
I was going to say cloud, both business and personal life, for very similar reasons. And this has been going on for a while. I had the experience between my first startup company and my second startup company from scratch that it was a night and day difference, right? The first company we had to raise and spend a huge amount of money putting capital equipment in place and buying and licensing software and blah, blah, blah. And second time around, we spent nothing. We were up and running in days. The whole application ran in the cloud. We were able to get in front of customers in a few months because we didn't have to install anything, right? So I think cloud is affecting so many businesses, but I think from an entrepreneurship perspective, in a very positive way. Right? It's giving us opportunities. It's reducing barriers to entry that are very good for innovation. Agree,
and I'll come back to you guys with the cloud question after we complete this round. Dennis, any thoughts on that?
I think the answers so far have been really good. The Tesla, I agree. My wife has one. I really like it. It's a great car.
I have one too, by the way. It's awesome.
I have to say, on personal, Uber. I've never used a taxi. I hated taxis, right? Who wanted to use a taxi? They were smelly, they were old, they were nasty, they're not good. I'm from New York, so they're really bad there. And in LA, man, you press that button, you're there. That's awesome. So personally, Uber, and from a business perspective, that'd be virtualization, mainly on the network equipment side. NFV, network functions virtualized. I think it's a very disruptive. I think it will change the market. It stalled the market a little bit, as you saw in the last couple of quarters with Juniper and Cisco. And it'll have a very big impact on how things are done in the future and how startups are done in the future as well.
Andy, any thoughts?
Yeah, from my perspective, I think, personally, probably the Xbox One. Anybody here have an Xbox One?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So last night I'm in the hotel and I'm trying to talk to the TV and say, one Xbox One guide, which is how you would normally get your guide from the Xbox One. It's an amazing technology. If you haven't seen it, go check it out because it's pretty cool. But you'll find yourself trying to talk to TVs that can't respond. From a work perspective, probably converged infrastructure. So I was telling Joan a few minutes ago, I think a lot of what VMware's done, working with VC, building out these things called vBlocks, and converged infrastructure or hyper-converged infrastructure, the new stuff that's coming now, is really spectacular. And to build on the virtualization point, next generation networking and virtual networking, that sort of thing will certainly help us as well. So virtual storage, lots in that space.
So quick follow-up question, unscripted, and feel free to tell me you have no thoughts about it. But when we talked about big data, we talked about, I think, Tal, you brought up a good point that we're only now really starting to understand what to do with the data, analyze the data. It's the era, we're ushering in an era of streaming real-time data versus historical data, stored data, and so on. When it comes to cloud, are we there in terms of have we really taken advantage of the technology, or what do you think is the next step in the evolution of cloud as we know it for business or consumer in the next 5 years?
I think the next evolution is the death of AT&T and Verizon. I mean, let's face about it, right? They charge you a lot of money for a phone, you get them, and now Amazon is getting down to pennies. Rackspace is down to pennies. What services, what value add is AT&T and Verizon doing other than give you a cell tower?
Right.
What's the point?
Right.
In my town, I live in Austin, we have Google Fiber. That was the end of Time Warner, that's the end of everybody else. They're gone.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So that goes back to the first question of which industries will be disrupted, telco for sure. And anyone else wants to?
Yeah, I think to your question in terms of if the cloud is ready for big data, I think that we're just starting to see companies that are taking advantage of it.
Yep.
I was going to get to it in one of the last questions, but there's a very interesting startup that we started to work with not too long ago. They were in stealth until yesterday, a company called Snowflake, which basically is developing a scalable data warehouse in the cloud. And the amazing thing that they did is instead of storing files and data on EBS, they actually use S3, which is the most cheapest, redundant, dirt cheap storage for data,
Yep.
where they get 10 times the performance of Redshift and other clusters. So I think we're starting to see companies that are taking cloud computing and really making it a platform for big data, but it's very, very early.
Yep.
So I think there's two opportunities not yet realized around that. The first is that knowledge can be shared across customers. And so, of course, this has to be limited, right? But there are, in almost every early stage company that I'm seeing or working with that has a cloud-based big data kind of solution, the real potential opportunity is that I can be collecting this data from your environment, and I'm collecting the same data from Fred's environment and Joe's environment. And now for some analytics, particularly things like predictive behaviors, I can look across the data that's coming from those sources. If I didn't have the cloud, I would not have the ability to do that type of aggregation and learn as fast, right? So, and that can be very effective when your solutions are dependent on some form of machine learning, for example. And the second opportunity that I haven't really seen realized yet that I think is there for big data in the cloud is that it's so much easier to be really, really responsive in terms of building analytics.
Yes.
Right, because, and so the last company I started, this was part of the platform, right? The idea is that, well, the data's already there, and if you decide you want to try a slightly different analytic or you want a slightly different simulation on it, you don't have to send code to anybody. You don't have to stream anything anywhere. You just run it on the data and show the graph, right? So from a user's perspective, we're not going to get to really operationalizing data in our business, as you described, until I can sit there and reactively iterate, play with it, right? And for most of us who aren't data scientists, that'll be around the visualization of the data. And if you're in the cloud, the opportunity to do that fast as a provider of analytics or to even allow for an ecosystem of people who just focus on analytics, the cloud is a prerequisite for that. So
Although
haven't
if
seen
I
it
may
yet.
push back a little bit on that point, because I think it's actually interesting. Going back to the Tesla example, they just announced the autopilot, right? So you're actually able, it's probably the first car, and there'll be a bunch of others who are actually going to take away the tedious or pleasant chore of driving. Depends on how you view it and when you view it. And so what happens is that although it has a beautiful UI, the car, it's no longer relevant because you'll be able to sit back and the car will take care of itself in that sense. Along these lines, when you think about analytics, visualization, and so on, do you see a situation where, well, it kind of doesn't matter because a bunch of these things in machine-to-machine type scenarios are going to be automated to a point where human intervention is not going to be needed?
Yes, for certain types of things that analytics would be used for, but not for understanding.
Right.
Right. So understanding has to come first before automation. And in some places we're there. Although to be fair, if we would just take all the freaking drivers off the road, we could automate everything. But in some spaces, we're already at the point where we could automate machine to machine, but in other spaces, we're not. And if you don't first understand the data, you can't automate the process. So a good example that is happening that's way ahead of the rest of the market is, of course, what traders want to do with predictive analytics, where they want to turn them into automated trading.
Yep.
And so they've been working for a while, taking really weird, esoteric, unstructured data and trying to turn it into an algorithm. If they can then prove that that algorithm is price predictive, hey, they're going to automate it right away and start trading on it. So yes, but there's no way they would start automated trading until they had first proven to themselves that consistently that algorithm's right? So, I mean, usually the one has to follow the other.
Yeah, and even if it does, sometimes we see problems. If you take a look at what happened with Knight Capital a couple of years, basically in about 40 minutes, they lost $400 million on automated
No, I
trading.
never said it was smart.
Yeah.
Yes.
So even when people think that they understand the data and put automation around it, I think it's always important to have checks and balances in place.
And
to
data
avoid-
changes too. I mean, everything is changing all the time. And
Yeah.
so you can only automate the things that you don't even think are going to change, right?
The highly repeatable.
They have to be to some degree, or
Right.
you have to be able to learn them quick enough.
That's right. Any thoughts on that before we move on, Ittai?
I just think the world is evolving, right? Compute was the challenge a few years back, either the price or just the power. All of a sudden you move to the cloud and now you don't have the challenge anymore and you can compute a lot of data very quickly than we did before. And so I think it's a process. The first piece is, okay, we have the data, we'll compute, we'll analyze it, we'll do something with it, and then we teach the machine to do it for us. And I think in some areas it's probably going to adapt faster than others with those checks and balances in place.
So my next question actually is somewhat almost personal, but all of you have picked well. You have an obvious track record in terms of picking well, whether it's ideas, partners, entrepreneurs, companies, employees. What are some of the guiding principles, the atypical guiding principles that have served you well, or things that you don't mind sharing with us as far as your ability to pick correctly and determine what's next? Andy, do you want to start? Sure. Yeah.
I think one of the guiding principles is don't be afraid to take chances. So, I'm sitting up here representing an insurance company, and a lot of people are going, why is an insurance company on this panel?
Why are you talking about taking chances?
Yeah, right. Yeah. The reality is, from a security perspective, we like to innovate. We like to look at new opportunities. We look at the space, the market space, and try to understand how we can be ahead of the curve, ahead of the bad guys, in essence. So we like to spend time to understand and invest in up-and-coming companies in a lot of cases. So a lot of it is taking chances. It's also taking chances on employees. Right? So someone who's never done something before, sometimes you have to give them the opportunity, give them the chance, be there as a safety net for them if they fall. But we like to try to push our people. We like to try to really push the envelope on what is possible. Think outside the box. Just because it hasn't been done before somewhere else doesn't mean that we can't do it. So we've come up with a number of innovative solutions that I'd be happy to share with you guys offline. But things that really I think are market leading in a lot of cases around technology, not just insurance.
Thank you. Ittai, do you want to?
What was the question?
Some of the things that have led you to pick well
Right.
over
Well,
your career.
I mean, looking at the enterprise space specifically, that's a place that the space that I spend most of my career of. I look at first identifying a challenge, and then making sure there's a captive market and a business model. And this is really different than the consumer space, right? So when I look at either acquisitions that we did or a company to join or a company to invest in, then I look, do they understand the challenge in the industry? Is there a real challenge? So many folks look at, okay, developing the next cool thing, but are they solving a problem? And if they are, what is the market opportunity and the market cap for that specific problem and challenge? And the last thing would be building the business model, because I think, again, in today's world, there's so many companies that don't have a business model, and maybe in the consumer space, it's fine because the measures or the measurements are different, but as I look at the enterprise space, you need a solid business model to be able to make it to the next level. So I always look at that as a very important point.
Well, so first I'm going to argue with your point about being good at picking, because I had a friend whose strategy for a long time, his investment strategy was called Short Joan. So don't believe what I say. Yeah, he's a very wealthy man, sadly. So I've always operated on a thesis, either in when I've been starting companies or funding companies. It's been on a thesis. And the thesis I've found, and I think the cycles are getting shorter, but in storage and data, the theses are usually good for up to 10 years. But usually I look for an outlier when I'm working with customers that indicates something's changing in a sort of fundamental way around data. So I follow the data and what are people doing with the data, and then I choose companies that are going to somehow enable or facilitate that general thing. To give you an example, I was involved in a company that was a clustered NAS company in 2000, and we were a turnaround company. And we shipped our product finally, and it performed like it was really bad, right? It was a very poor performer, but it was a great clustered NAS product, very easy to use. You could not break the thing. Anything could fail, something else would take over. But, it was a dog. So we sold to, we had to find customers who were going to buy this dog version of the product while we fixed it. And lo and behold, we found an inordinate number of customers who wanted this product because, for reasons other than the fact that it was slow. And what was going on at that time? Well, the world was still digitizing a lot of information that had been created in the pre-digital age. So people were taking these boxes, shipping them down to Mexico and digitizing newspapers, filling this box up with, half a petabyte of newspaper data, and then shipping it back again. And they were buying it from us because it was very easy to use and you couldn't break the thing, right? And they were using unskilled workers in Mexico to drive these things. Then we had a customer who wanted our boxes shipped to a prison. And I'm like, what? Well, we have to keep videotape on all the prisoners, and we need a place to store all this video, and we don't really want to move it away from the prison, and of course we don't have IT staff in the prison, right? So what did they want? They wanted a box that an idiot could run. It couldn't be breakable, right? And it could store lots and lots of, sort of not needing any performance kind of data. So what I saw there in that company was that we had what I thought was kind of a dog failure product, but what we did was find the outlier market that was going to be the disruptor. And I saw enough of it and said, hey, there's going to be no such thing as transactional data for the next 10 years. It's all going to be about saving this kind of new unstructured data, things like video, which we are now in this next decade operating on and trying to analyze, right? So that's how I pick. I see some outlier in the customer environment, and I follow it to its source and see what's happening. And if it's fundamentally different, then I try to figure out why. Right?
Interesting. Thank you.
I think for me, we look at a lot of different startup companies, both as an acquisition target, and also I help a lot of our VCs to think about what to invest in and what not. And I find that the same rule that works for that, for me, is the same rule that actually works for selecting who to hire into our company. So we look for people who we call PSDs, not PhDs, but PSD, as in poor, smart, and determined to be rich. And so that has worked really well for us because these are people that are going to figure it out. These are people that are going to work harder than their competitors. They're going to outwork you. They're going to outcompete you. And we find that that is essentially the rule that works. And with that, you need to have a very, very strong sense of optimism.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of people, even in startup companies, that just fall very quickly into, oh my God, the competitor launched this, and what are we going to do about that? So you really need to continue to imagine yourself, what if we could make this work? What can our company become? Both as us as a company,
Yep.
also companies that we invest in or think about acquiring.
So hungry optimist. Great.
I get asked this one a lot, so I will say this. Customers are stupid. Don't listen to them. They don't know what they want. They want whatever they have incrementally better. And if you want to make a leapfrog, you've got to leapfrog them. You have a year or two, you got to build that product. You have a different path. A second thing is never look at your competitors after you start the company. Because if you do that, you'll get little pieces of them. You take them and put them in your own. You don't want to do that. You want to have your own vision. Have your own vision. Be your own person. And don't build anything because you want to be rich. If you want to do a startup because you want to be rich, get out. Go run a hedge fund with some algorithmic trading or an insurance company and screw people over. But don't, whatever you do, don't do that because it's about a love of a product. It's about a love of an idea. You do it because you have a passion for it. Otherwise, it's not there. It's not the right thing to do. And sure, you may be able to make money at it, and you may get rich, but you're not going to be happy doing it. So that's it, really. I just don't listen to any customers, ever. Whatever they tell me to do, go the other way. Seriously, go the other way. I can't tell you how many times a customer told me to go one direction, and I went the other way, and I was like, wow, that was so great. What a good idea. And the last thing is, if you can't say your value prop, I was listening to 10-minute pitches over there, in 30 seconds, you don't have an idea, and you don't have a company. Your value prop has to be really clear, really simple, 30 seconds long. Tell me what you do and how you solve the problem. That's it. So
That's very clever. Now, just I'm curious about customers. First, I don't assume that this is how you would approach the conversation with a customer. But,
no, they don't. Yeah.
But is it
Gosh, you're
is it
stupid.
during
No.
the inception of an idea or a company, or is it later that you have to ignore what the customers are telling you? Is it
In the exception, because that's the part where you have
Right.
the long build cycle, right? Let's say I usually build hardware products, so there's a 2-year cycle there,
Yeah.
right? So I have to ignore them for 2 years so that I can build the right thing, because otherwise it takes me too long to build it. If I was a cloud-based Facebook, Twitter, Uber thing, maybe I can listen to my customers and get
Right.
feedback right away,
Right.
but I don't get that luxury. Also, customers, they're comfortable, right? They're comfortable where they're. If you went around to somebody right now, like I think Uber is the coolest thing in the world. I think it's just a great idea. If you went around to someone and said, okay, what do you think about doing taxi service on your phone and click a button? People are like, I wouldn't really use it. I don't really use taxis. I do this. But you have to come up with that idea. You have to jump, right, and do that. And taxi companies had text messaging before where you could text them to pick them up. It's that whole app. It's that whole style, that whole employment method. That's what changes it around. And so it would have been incremental before instead of it was
It's the old, I think Henry Ford said, if I asked my customers what they wanted, they would tell me a wagon with more horses or something.
Exactly.
Yeah, but
whatever they want.
okay, so there's two types of listening to your customers.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
asking your customers what you should do. Well, okay, shame on us if we do that. But I honestly think that the best products are developed from a deep personal understanding of the customer or market problem or any unsolved challenge, right? And I don't know how you can understand the unsolved challenge in a business you're trying to disrupt if you don't first understand that business, right? I spend all of my time with customers, not asking them. I don't even tell them what we're doing, and I don't ask them what they want us to build. I ask them all about their problems. What makes their life difficult? What are they struggling with? What's not working? I watch them, right? It's a different type of asking, I guess.
Yes.
But
And I think there's a huge value in that.
There's one thing, there's a movie, As Good as It Gets. It's with Jack Nicholson. All right. And he goes in and he writes these books where they're great romantic scenes. And the assistant at the front goes, how come you write women so well in your books? And he says, well, I write them just like men, but I take out all logic and sense and accountability, and that's it. And that's what I think of customers when they talk about products to me, when they tell me how to make my products. I'm like, because you would have thought of it too? They won't. But I agree with you. You go there to refine it, and you have to make left and right turns based on what they say, and you have to understand their problems, and hopefully you did that in the beginning.
Right.
But it's too easy for someone to say, go do this because X did that.
So with that, I mean, we have a couple more questions, but actually I think it's intriguing enough that everyone not only has a question, but a comment on what we just talked about. Go ahead.
I remember, John, you're talking about oil industry. Could it be one of the areas that you see some disruption happening?
Oil, the oil industry? We can only hope, right? I don't know. I just was shocked that number 2 through 12 on the Fortune 500 are oil companies. But, I mean, I think oil's going to go away at some level in its current form, and people are finally awake to maybe giving up on one of the biggest industries that's dependent on it, which is the auto industry, right? So slowly, over a long period of time, I'm hoping that will change, right? For a variety of reasons. Obviously, you know, it's a limited resource, so we're all paying way too much money for something that we shouldn't have to pay. We should want to pay commodity prices for, number one. Number two, it has issues for the world, for global economy or global warming. And thirdly, it's driving way too much of world politics, right? Because it is a limited, something in very limited supply. So for lots and lots of reasons, if the whole dynamic around oil and gas would change, I think we'd be a lot better off across the board. So I have hope, but.
Anyone else? Go ahead.
So in developing a product, to what extent, you don't listen to the customer, but to what extent do you crowdsource, crowdshare to get input as you're developing the concept?
So that's a good question. Usually, I have to say I cheated because each one has always been the first company was an ISP. And so it was really easy because the first thing I said is, wow, we're going to need high-speed internet. People are going to want this always on. So the next company was a DSL company. Makes sense. And then everybody's always on. Wow, they're going to get really infected by attacks and viruses. So the next company was a security company where we blocked attacks, which everybody thought was crazy because you should just detect them. Of course, it made no sense because the value prop was, look, you put it in and we detect it and you have to go run around and find it. It's kind of silly. How about you just block it? Then you don't have to deal with it anymore. I just heard a company pitching the opposite over there, that was old technology. You should go back to detection. I was like, wow, it's like we should get rid of the cars because of gas and bring back the horse. I don't understand where that came from, but maybe they'll get funded. So then the fourth company was, gee whiz, I built all these boxes that can block things, and they're all DPI, deep packet inspection. There's no way to test them. I'll build a product that can beat them up and test them. So I guess I experienced each problem along the way, and when I found the problem, I go, oh wow, I really need a solution to that. Oh, no one has it. I'll go build it. So there's a little bit of that there. I don't know if that answered your question, but hopefully you get the idea.
Actually, was there a company that was funded, oh shoot, my husband and my son were talking about this yesterday. There was a company on Kickstarter that set out to raise, you know, like $10,000 and they made $10 million because the idea was so exciting to people. And so I don't think it's that far off to say, of course there are sites that let you try ideas. There's I forget the name of the site where you can vote on something and they'll, at the end of every week, they make 100 prototypes of it. So I think that, my youngest son is actually starting a company right now, and they actually had a conversation where they said, well, why don't we just go out on Kickstarter? We don't need any money, but we'll get a lot of feedback, right? So I think that that's not yet fully tapped opportunity in a lot of ways. And it's embarrassing that large companies who have huge customer bases don't actually crowdsource, in fact, don't use any kind of rational method for how they interact with their customers.
I actually have a quick follow-up question, if you don't mind, because I have a very strong opinion about incubators in big companies. How many of you experience, I mean, anyone has an opinion here about incubators?
Yeah, they don't work.
They don't work.
They don't work. Yeah. Anyone who thinks that they do work?
Can we come up with even one example?
Yeah. I mean, it's, to me, you know, every time I looked at incubators, to me it's sort of like an admission that you cannot really innovate in mainstream. And instead of fixing that, what you're saying, let me shield the idea until it's ready for prime time, but there's no one there to actually take the idea and do anything with it.
Well, right. Ready. Now, in fairness, the companies and the organizations that are great incubators are really terrible at productizing. I mean, look at Xerox PARC. I was at SRI International. I mean, we could come up with the most amazing ideas. We couldn't productize anything. Look at universities, right? So, you know, to be balanced, it doesn't work the other way either.
The threshold of, you know, ROI that you're looking for is just at a different level in terms of
I'll give you a counterpoint on that. I think if we all read Apple's history, the iPhone and whole of iOS was actually developed completely as an incubator. In fact, they took all of these engineers, put them in a building, closed them, and didn't let them talk to anybody about what they're doing. So you can't say that it completely doesn't work.
Did they
But
call
you
it
have
an
to have.
incubator? Did they refer to it as an incubator?
No, I don't think they labeled it like that, but the label matters less, I think. The point is it can be done in a big company if you structure it in a way that really shields everybody
Right.
from everything. When I
Yeah,
was in
now-
Oracle and we were
And you
trying
have
to
Steve
develop...
Jobs at the helm.
And you have Steve
That
Jobs that
helps.
can enforce
Yeah.
that. I'll give you a counterexample. In Oracle, we were many times trying to develop new products, and then people would show up in my office and say, hey, you have to use my charting library, and you have to use my security, and you have to use this and that. And before you know it, you became yet another dog, you know? So-
Right.
Now, to be fair, right, and in that Apple product, the key designer was an outside contractor. So I think that what they did was demonstrate some important elements that probably need to be there that most companies just simply aren't willing or capable to do, right? Lock everyone in a room and separate them from everyone else. Don't tell them, oh, by the way, you have to use as many of our current products as possible. This is a pet peeve I have, that we talk about, maximizing our IP. And that means use stuff that we already have. And I'm like, that's not new IP then, okay? Because it's the old stuff. So I think, companies probably could innovate much more frequently than they do, but they refuse to sort of follow rules that would work or a process that would work.
It takes discipline from the top, I
Doesn't
think.
it? Given just a given time. Yeah.
Comment, in terms of the incubator, there are several success stories by so-called entrepreneur in residence. Of the son of the sort of wealth, actual income, and those are venture capitalists. Would you like to comment what's the major difference of that versus like the Steve Park or even like the big corporations are in that?
Well, I would
EIR,
question how
yeah.
many of those entrepreneurs and residents are doing anything but jumping on board of
Right.
some two smart guys that walked in the front door.
Yeah.
And I would be willing to bet, though I could not prove it, that the vast majority are people who just hop on board somebody else's cool idea, which is nothing wrong with. But I don't think that venture firms are, no offense, are in any way a vehicle for disruptive new ideas, right?
That's right. Right.
They may know it when they see it, maybe, but I don't think they have there's any sort of fuel there.
Yeah, I agree with
I
that.
disagree. I firmly disagree. I think venture firms, I think Kickstarter is the next venture firm. I totally agree with you there. Kickstarter will kill the venture firms. But venture firms have a good place in the world. They do recognize idea. I mean, it'd be tough to walk around here and say that, and venture firms are not only a firm, they're sometimes people. You look at the guy with Arista, Andy, that, there's Google's seed money, and there's a bunch of other people's seed money, and those people exist, and they do make new ideas.
He wouldn't call himself a venture guy.
If you invest in more than 10 companies a year, you're a venture firm. Sorry, that's just the way it goes.
Well, I don't think that the question was whether venture capital has a place as far as the innovation economy.
Right.
The question was,
Can it be
EIR, is an EIR an example of incubation, which I agree with you, Joan, that it's not. But I do agree with you as well I should, that VCs have
Yeah,
a
they
place
play
in
an
the
important
innovation
role.
food chain, so to speak. Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Actually, as a VC yourself, I was wondering what was your answer to the question that you were posing before? What the criteria that you use to sort of pick out winners?
For me, well, you obviously, every firm has different criteria as far as what they're looking for, whether it's the domain, whether it's the stage, whether it's something that they feel strongly about it as a thesis.
Sure, but I think if I'm not wrong, your question was
Yeah.
what are some of the non-obvious indicators, right? So it's probably more or less
So that is the obvious.
market, et cetera.
Right, so that is the obvious. We got that out of the way. To me, it's first and foremost about the people and the chemistry between the people. One of the things we're always looking for is some of the dynamics, especially if you have a couple of founders coming in, you want to see how they work together, how they present. You always look for, is there any friction that is sort of like, felt, but you can't really sense it. But you have to be sort of like very, very sensitive to it. You're looking for things like determination. Really, sometimes someone comes in and you talk to them and you come up with an alternative viewpoint on what they're proposing. And if they're quick to take your viewpoint or agree with you, that's also somewhat of an issue. Because you want someone with that kind of a strong conviction, someone who wants to change the world, someone who thinks or knows that they know better than you do. And you're looking for that kind of a fire in the belly. And I don't know if
One of the things I look for when I'm dealing with the startups is how persistent they are to come back. So I think it goes back to the people. Before we write a check for $1 million or multi-millions dollars, I want to know that the people that are trying to sell us a new product or innovation are really committed to it, and to the point that they're willing to continue to press their mission. And that's been the really interesting thing I think that I've seen from a lot of Israeli startups is they are quite persistent.
Persistence?
But isn't the definition of insanity doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result?
Well, insanity is another one.
Yeah, what you have to do is go back to the VC, but every time the story's different, eventually you'll get one.
Any other questions? Thoughts, comments? Okay, with that, I want to thank you all. It's been a fantastic and invigorating conversation. Thanks so much.
Thank you.